There are cases so unsettling that even seasoned investigators refuse to talk about them, and this one sits at the top of that list. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that left people speechless, it was the cold smile the killer carried from the moment he was arrested to the second he took his last breath. What pushed a man who looked so ordinary, so harmless, to cross a line that most people can't even imagine? He didn't grow up in chaos. In fact, his childhood looked almost ordinary: military bases, frequent moves, and a father whose strict discipline shaped every part of the home. To most people, that kind of structure builds resilience. But in his case, it created something else entirely. Teachers remembered him as polite, quiet, a kid who blended into the background. Yet even then, he showed flashes of defiance that no one thought much about. Those moments were small, easy to ignore, but later they would start to look like the first signs that something inside him was already shifting. And as he got older, that quiet exterior wouldn't stay quiet for long. As he stepped into adulthood, everything around him suggested he was finally on solid ground. He built a respectable career, carried himself with confidence, and won people over with a charm that felt effortless. To outsiders, he looked like a man who had figured life out: steady job, polished reputation, and a family that seemed to complete the picture. But inside the home, the mask didn't hold. His temper slipped through in sudden flashes, small enough at first to explain away, yet sharp enough to leave everyone uneasy. What started as impatience shifted into control, quiet demands, cold stares, and an unsettling need to dominate even the smallest details. Friends still saw the dependable man he pretended to be, but behind closed doors, the tension was thickening. The shift was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not living with him, but it was the beginning of a pattern that would only grow darker from here. The shift from irritation to outright aggression didn't take long. What once showed up as quiet mood swings turned into explosive outbursts that left everyone around him on edge. Arguments became unpredictable. Small disagreements triggered reactions that felt wildly out of proportion. And for the first time, the people closest to him saw how quickly his charm could collapse into something colder, something calculated. Each incident left deeper cracks in the family, but instead of taking responsibility, he twisted every confrontation into someone else's fault. The danger was no longer subtle, everyone around him felt it, even if they couldn't explain why. What pushed him past the point of return wasn't just anger, it was obsession. He became fixated on the idea that everyone around him was against him, twisting harmless moments into imagined betrayals. This paranoia fed his temper until it burst in a way no one in the home had ever seen. The outburst was sudden and terrifying, a glimpse into how far he'd allowed his mind to spiral. And once that moment passed, the fear didn't fade. It lingered. Everyone sensed that something inside him had shifted permanently, and whatever boundaries once existed were gone for good. The moment he walked into the apartment with the girls, something felt off. He wasn't loud. He wasn't frantic. Instead, he was unusually calm, almost rehearsed. That calmness is what made what happened next so chilling. He pushed the girls into a conversation they didn't understand, forcing them to repeat questions that were never theirs in the first place. His obsession had taken over completely, twisting reality in a way only he could follow. And when he finally acted on that warped logic, the outcome shattered any illusion that he had ever been the father he pretended to be. It was an act that stunned the city and sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom that would later judge him. By the time police confronted him, the evidence was overwhelming. Still, he acted unfazed, as if the situation were some kind of misunderstanding. That detachment carried straight into the courtroom. Prosecutors pieced together the timeline of his actions, showing how each step had been deliberate, not a moment of panic, but a calculated choice. His past partners described the years of control and intimidation, revealing a pattern he could no longer hide behind charm. And when the jury realized how long he'd been preparing for the final act, the decision became almost immediate. Within minutes, his future was sealed. Behind bars, his behavior only grew stranger. While most inmates withdrew or spent years apologizing to the families they'd hurt, he did the opposite. He mocked the case, cracked jokes about the investigation, and insisted people were blowing everything out of proportion. In private conversations, he tried to rewrite the story entirely, claiming he'd been misunderstood, that the public didn't know the real truth. Some inmates even said he seemed proud of the attention. The more disturbed people were by his comments, the more entertained he became. And with each passing year, it became obvious that he wasn't waiting for justice. He was waiting for an audience. Even on his last night, he didn't show fear. If anything, he seemed amused that the appeals were finally over. When they brought him into the chamber, he scanned the room like he was checking who had shown up to watch. Then he spotted her, the woman whose life he'd shattered. And without hesitation, he threw out a casual greeting, as if the years between them meant nothing. His final moments were laced with the same attitude he'd carried for decades, mocking, detached, and convinced he still held the upper hand. As the injection took effect, he lifted his head, laughed, and asked if he was still alive. Moments later, the room went quiet. Whatever power he thought he had disappeared with his last breath. What happened inside that home, inside that courtroom, and finally inside that execution chamber continues to haunt anyone who knows the story. Some see a broken mind. Others see pure cruelty. But whatever he truly was, he made one thing clear: evil doesn't always show itself with warnings. Sometimes it hides behind a smile, behind a calm voice, behind the illusion of a life that seems perfectly normal. And that's what makes his story so unsettling. It forces us to ask the question no one ever wants to consider: how well do we really know the people around us?